Hi everyone, namaste. I'm Jill Loftis of Nuit Astrology, and this is my, in addition to my little series on each of the planets and the planetary energies. Now, so far I've covered Saturn and Jupiter, and each planet has its unique signature. So let's go, kind of back to one of the faster moving planets, and we're going to talk about the planet Mercury. Now, Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. And from our vantage point here on the Earth, it only takes 88 days, approximately 88 days, for Mercury to make one lap all the way around. So same goes with your natal chart, 88 days, and it makes a spin through the entire zodiac. So, typically it moves pretty quickly. And Mercury is the planet that relates to our mind and how we speak and think, right? If you think of the term silver-tongued, right, that relates to Mercury. If you mention that someone is mercurial, right, their personality, right, that can often be applied to those Mercury-ruled signs, which are Gemini and Virgo, right? It's very a mental energy, all right? It's very much about the thought patterns. And, it relates to the third house in the wheel, because the third house is ruled by Gemini, but it also has to do with siblings and neighbors. And typically it has to do with them because those are the first people that we have to learn to communicate with, right? We need to learn to communicate with our families and with our siblings and with the people just around us in our day-to-day lives. And so that is part of why Mercury rules that third house of communication and Gemini. Now, Mercury can be also very much a planet associated with trickster energy, and because the mind can play tricks on you, right? Or you can verbally play with someone. Our mind and how we express ourselves and our methods of speech and methods of communicating impact our lives in such a huge way, right? Our own mindset, right? You can change your mind about something and it changes your whole world, right? It changes your whole approach to life. And it is always interesting to note the particular sign, zodiacal sign, that your Mercury is in your chart, just because that explains how your mind works, right? Let's say, for example, that you have a Mercury in Aquarius. You will tend to be very forward thinking, very detached in your thinking, and usually have trouble bringing your ideas down to earth for the rest of the earthlings, right? Let's say you have Mercury in Taurus, just like I do. You can be a little slow on the uptake. It can take a while to lock something into the mind, but once it's there, it can be really, there. It can also lead to really holding on to certain thought patterns, It really, whatever sign the planet is in, it gives it that flavor, right? You think of the planet as the energy is being expressed, but the sign is the filter through which that energy is expressed. It's also super useful to understand whether your Mercury was direct or retrograde, because often if you find that your Mercury was retrograde at birth, it will take you a while in this lifetime to kind of find your voice, to be able to express yourself. You may have found yourself as a child feeling very misunderstood, or like people couldn't really get you, or that you couldn't really, you'd have these deep feelings and then you were unable to express them. Because remember that our feelings are ruled by the moon, right? But then when we feel a certain way, especially as young people, right, and it takes us a while to find the words to wrap around our emotions, right, and express them appropriately and, hopefully kindly and harmoniously as well, right? It really can be quite the process and quite the challenge as well. Another thing to note is how close to the sun our Mercury is, because if it's too close to the sun, it can be what we call combust. So within 3 degrees of the sun, and more if it's applying like towards the sun, and less if it's moving away, pulling away from the sun, it can be what is called combust. This can really blot out that energy and make it so that our sun kind of burns it up. It can be very similar to a retrograde type of feeling, like that you can't get yourself to express yourself in the way that you feel heard, in a way that you can really feel seen and heard, which is so important, right? So it can be quite the master lesson. What else can I tell you about Mercury? Well, let's talk about the Mercury retrograde, since that is probably one of the first retrogrades that you really begin to hear about. Even the muggles know about Mercury retrograde, right? Because it is blamed for any communication errors or things going haywire. Although I have to vouch for it, because it does tend to. Whenever a planet is retrograde, it appears closer to the Earth. It does exert more of an influence, and the energy just becomes a little more erratic, right? So, do's and don'ts. It's marvelous for repair, rethink, redo, re-examine, relaunch, whatever. Pretty much anything, but particularly things related to technology, electricity, communication, writing, things that are ruled by Mercury. And, keep in mind, it's not just from the date that Mercury stations retrograde and to the date that it stations direct, although those are both any kind of stationary point where the planet appears. Remember, they're not actually going backwards, but the planet appears to pause and change direction. Those are very powerful times, very powerful points in time. And you should always be aware of the station of any planet. But, to see symbolically what occurs in your world and the world beyond. But to look at the shadow zone before the retrograde, you kind of begin to consider it retrograde at the point where it's going to back up to, right? So let's say it's going to, you've got Mercury going along, and it's going to station direct when it goes direct at, like it is next month, at 8 degrees, right? And so the shadow begins once it gets to 8 degrees, because it's entering that point. All of those degrees are going to have to be recovered, rethought, redone, right? So if those are having any interesting angles to anything in particular with your planet, or conjuncting, touching anything in your particular planetary sphere, your natal chart, then that's something to really pay attention to, because it's the 1, 2, 3 punch, right? That's why third time's a charm is a statement. It's a thing that people say, because the planet comes across and gives you a little ding, and then it comes back across and gives you another ding, and then it gives you the final ding. And if you're paying attention to it, you begin to adjust and adapt from those nudges until you don't wait for the third time for it to knock you across the room, right? So then once it does station direct, it still has to traverse through those degrees, and then it will enter the new territory. And that's when Mercury really has gotten back into its full power. That's the post-shadow period, right? After it goes stationary direct, and that's when you can initiate again. And so it's important to understand and know those dates related to any retrograde period of Mercury. All right, well, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear what your Mercury sign is and what you know about yourself based on that Mercury sign. You may also wish to look at what house it is in, and of course, what aspects are to it. Those all really help you to understand how your mind works, how your mouth works. And truly, as one of the great yogis, oh gosh, what is his name? He did that marvelous poster of all the different poses. I'll drop his name below if I can remember it. But he's a very famous yoga teacher, and he has a quote where he says, if you control the mind, or if you can control the mouth, what goes into it and what comes out of it, you pretty much have life figured out. And I think that's true. All right, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was useful and helpful. And I'll see you in the next video on the planets, or for one of my planetary energy forecasts. Please do comment, share. It helps the channel to grow. Namaste. Bye.